My name is Michelle Nicole Johnson, and I am a librarian at the College of Coastal Georgia and a graduate student pursuing a doctorate in public administration from Valdosta State University in Valdosta, Georgia. In this presentation, I will discuss how the pandemic impacted privacy in academic libraries and offer suggestions to help better protect the privacy of people in library spaces and beyond on a typical day and in times of crisis and uncertainty. It is important to note that this is an overview and is in no way comprehensive because the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. It is evolving, and research about its impacts will likely continue for many years to come. The COVID-19 pandemic amplified and exacerbated many pre-existing problems across all sectors of society, such as weaknesses in the supply chain, staff and equipment shortages at hospitals, and inequalities in the workplace and in healthcare and housing, the vulnerabilities of essential workers, and the disparities of the digital divide, according to Ventriglio and colleagues, as well as Brown. And these stories were told daily by the media as the virus spread around the world. But the pandemic also amplified potential problems related to privacy in libraries, although those threats and weaknesses quietly lurked behind the scenes, overshadowed by all the hard work librarians did to keep the doors open and the information flowing, according to Burkhart and colleagues. Looking back at the early days of the pandemic to the spring of 2020, it was a chaotic and confusing time. COVID-19 was beginning to spread across the United States, with cases steadily increasing around the world. In response to the health crisis, and out of an abundance of caution, many businesses, schools, government offices, and other organizations shut down, either voluntarily or by mandate. Overnight, the world moved inside and online. At colleges and universities across America, faculty and students had to quickly adjust, according to Muhawe and colleagues. Video conferencing tools became the norm for instruction. In the midst of transitioning to remote work and limited access to their workplaces, librarians did what librarians do and became creative problem solvers, pivoting to their digital collections and online resources. Curbside pickup services became prevalent at libraries, and some libraries even mailed books to users. Librarians designed research guides or LibGuides with links to online library resources and created a variety of innovative tools to support students, faculty, and staff during this challenging time, according to Sneed. Collaboration and interaction with third-party database vendors increased dramatically during the first year of the pandemic. Many database vendors and publishers created information portals for healthcare professionals, researchers, and the general public, and allowed non-subscribers temporary access to their subscription-only databases. Meanwhile, ebook publishers temporarily offered unlimited access to their publications as opposed to one, two, or three simultaneous users, which they normally allowed, according to Breeding. As academic institutions began reopening, a wide range of protocols were adopted in an attempt to keep library users and staff safe from the virus that would ultimately claim the lives of more than 1 million people in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Staff at some academic libraries essentially took on the role of public health workers and checked visitors' temperatures at the door. They asked health-related questions and sent people away if they were running fevers or exhibiting symptoms, according to Muhawe, Wong, Hayes, and Bashir. Seat reservation and room booking platforms were used to limit the number of people in the library and to monitor library users' locations to assist health officials with contact tracing, according to Muhawe and co-authors. The collection of personal health data by library staff and the increased use of digital resources by library users created potential privacy concerns. Health data and other personal information collected during the screenings may not have been properly stored, according to Muhawe, Wong, Hayes, and Bashir. The same is true of information about library users that was collected for the purpose of contact tracing. Data from health screenings is required to be held for a certain amount of time, according to Muhawe and his co-authors. If they're not properly stored, this can create privacy concerns. In addition, the increased use of databases with contracts that were likely agreed upon prior to the pandemic also created potential risks to users, as did the use of other data collecting digital resources that were provided free of charge to students and faculty as well as the general public, according to Muhawe and co-authors. If library users were not informed about the increased risk to their privacy caused by these practices and services, this creates privacy concerns. In their 2022 study, Muhawe and his co-authors evaluated 25 large academic research libraries and found that none of them made modifications to their privacy policies in response to increased database use during the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, 4 of the institutions did not have privacy policies explaining their data collection before the pandemic. Quote, full disclosure of data practices is key to resolving the privacy concerns of library patrons, according to Muhawe and co-authors, page 24. Before I continue, I want to point out that there were many positive practices adopted by academic libraries in response to the pandemic. There was an increase in the use of open access materials, which is always a plus for students, and digitization efforts were prioritized. Digitization and virtual alternatives to in-person programs and instruction improved accessibility for people with disabilities and allowed people to participate in educational programs and access information from around the world, according to Cox and Pionke. These are just a few of the positive trends and changes that hopefully will continue. But with innovation during the pandemic came potential risks that threaten the foundation of librarianship, and that is the right to privacy. The introduction to the American Library Association's Privacy Toolkit states, quote, in too many cases, busy librarians are not making the connections between new technology and the threats to users in the form of invasion of privacy. This threat to privacy stifles intellectual freedom and the freedom to read. The Privacy Toolkit and other literature offer advice to help academic libraries strengthen their current privacy policies and prepare for inevitable crises and change. Library privacy policies can be strengthened by evaluating them and updating them. Gressel recommends reviewing library privacy policies on a regular basis because reality is constantly changing, perhaps not on the same scale as a global pandemic, but our realities do change when we purchase new technology or databases, when we establish new routines or procedures, and during other disruptions caused by weather and so on. Chamara, a contributor to ALA's Intellectual Freedom Manual, wrote guidelines for libraries that were reopening in the summer and fall of 2020 and reminded librarians that personally identifiable information should not be retained unless it is required by law or otherwise necessary to allow the library to manage the use of library services and resources. Next, scrutinize policies of third-party vendors before signing the contract. Most databases and technology come from organizations in the commercial sector, where there are different expectations of privacy and values that are centered around profit rather than privacy, according to Breeding. So it is important for libraries to critically review the privacy policies of any software, databases, ebook vendors, and other technology before contracts are signed. DiVittorio and Gianelli discussed the importance of evaluating vendors in their 2021 research, which highlights the work of Auraria Library, which serves 3 academic institutions in Denver. Auraria Library is in a city with a high percentage of undocumented college students, and library staff discovered that one of its third-party database vendors also designed databases for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. In response to this knowledge, the library created a vendor ethics task force, which uses a values-based metrics tool to help librarians evaluate vendors. The purpose is to create a culture of transparency and an awareness of companies that may have financial interests, alliances, and business practices that do not align with the values of the library and the colleges it serves, and that might cause harm to library users, according to DiVittorio and Gianelli. Next, be transparent. Share your privacy policies with library users. As library policies are evaluated and updated, be transparent and share data practices with library users. Library users have a right to know what personal data is being collected, how it will be used, how long it will be held, if it will be shared and with whom, if third-party services are involved and what their policies are, and what laws, regulatory requirements, and privacy rights are relevant to them. Collaborate. Collaborate with other library and non-library privacy rights advocates. Build relationships. Partner with library organizations and non-library organizations that are active in the privacy rights arena. Join forces and share resources, and use the many privacy tools that have already been created for libraries, according to Gressel. The American Library Association and other organizations that advocate for privacy have published guidelines on common red flags in third-party vendor contracts. ALA also has tools that were created before the pandemic, such as its privacy toolkit, and other resources that have been created since the pandemic, such as ALA's privacy field guides, according to Muhawe and co-authors, as well as the American Library Association. Teach library users about privacy policies and privacy rights as they apply in the library as well as outside the library. People have grown accustomed to giving up their privacy for access to technology to the extent that our privacy, our very personal information, is treated as a currency that we exchange for a discount at a retail store, or to play a popular online video game, to participate in online communities through social media, to access articles for school, or to access important information we need for a variety of reasons, according to Ward. Despite what might look like complacency, Park and Vance found that students are concerned about their privacy. However, Mutimukwe and his co-authors found that individual students have varying expectations and levels of awareness about how their personal information should be protected. Librarians have the moral responsibility to educate people about how to protect their personal information, according to Gressel. We need to be that alarm that is constantly reminding students, faculty, and staff, and the general public about their fundamental rights to privacy and intellectual freedom. Librarians can talk about privacy during instruction, one-on-one sessions, provide handouts and host workshops, share information on social media platforms, etc. And they can talk about data collection that's done by retail websites, online gaming, dating apps, and other virtual realms in which we all live, work, learn, and play. Finally, encourage discussion, reading, and reflection about privacy issues at your library. Graf, Quinones Riegos, Scott, and Sr. created an annotated bibliography with suggested readings about ethics and recommended that librarians and library staff talk regularly about case studies and scenarios related to ethical dilemmas. This strategy can be modified to specifically address privacy concerns that might arise during a health crisis or natural disaster, for example. Libraries should create a workplace culture where there is less emphasis on creating and following hard, fast rules and more discussion that involves weighing ethical considerations within different contexts, according to Graf. In conclusion, after the United States was attacked by foreign terrorists on September 11, 2001, a review of what went wrong revealed that intelligence was overlooked or dismissed. The 9/11 Commission described it as a failure of imagination, according to Keenan Hamilton. The possibility of attacks should have been predicted and could have possibly been prevented, saving thousands of lives. Academic librarians are not responsible for predicting terrorist attacks. Librarians are not responsible for knowing when the next extreme weather event or man-made disaster or pandemic will strike. However, librarians are responsible for their spaces, both the physical and the virtual, and the services provided on any typical day, as well as in times of crisis and change. Librarians are responsible for ensuring that library users' privacy rights are protected, even as reality changes. Going forward, we must exercise our moral imagination and plan for ethical dilemmas we might encounter in the future, whether from terrorism, social unrest, natural disasters, or the effects of climate change, and during times of change due to technological advancements such as artificial intelligence, or the next public health crisis, according to Muhawe and his co-authors. Holbert calls this ongoing preparation future-proofing and says it is, quote, less about knowing what you are future-proofing against and more about the process, staying flexible, being able to recognize trends, upskilling personnel, and being able to manage change and pivot. Thank you for listening to my presentation. These are my references.